evening, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Start with the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Ladies and gentlemen, while still standing, I would probably not be able to come up with words for the events of the last week in Newtown, Connecticut. Tragedy would be an understatement. I would ask that the town of Greenwich, representing the BET, that we offer a moment of silence in recognition of that. Thank you very much. I'd also, while still standing, there is one lucky individual. Mr. Norton's granddaughter was in second grade in that class that day. I got an email from Mr. Norton that morning and said, my granddaughter's in Sandy Hook High School. And I was like,
Elementary school.
and I went, uh-oh. And it was followed by a she's okay. And not being prepared, not knowing exactly how to handle that, I think I wrote him one sentence: get in your car and head up there now. I think that's all I could say to him that day. There was nothing else I could say. In conversations over the weekend, or emails and conversations even today, I've known Mr. Norton in my 21 years in the government. I can't believe. Takes the kids to the city yesterday, takes them to the Nutcracker. There's a strong guy right there leading his family. Thank you, Mr. Norton.
This one. Mike, thank you very much. I saw on my screen Friday morning that there was a lockdown in some of the Newtown schools. I didn't identify them. I presumed it was at the high school. So as a result of that, I called my daughter-in-law. Now, my oldest son, who's also or he's junior actually, had moved to Sandy Hook 12 years ago, just before Kate, their second child, was born. And I left a message with Ann, who's my daughter-in-law, to try to find out what happened. Well, about 45 minutes later, my son called me to say, Alexa's fine. And that's when I learned that it was at the Sandy Hook Elementary School. Art has 4 children, ages 3 to his oldest will be 14 next week. The 3 older children have attended.
Sato and Antonio. Sato and Antonio, please come to the town hall meeting room. Sato and Antonio, please come to the town hall meeting room. Thank you.
They've all attended Sandy Hook Elementary School. Newtown has a K through 4. I believe there were 4 elementary schools, and they go 5th and 6th and 7th and 8th, and the 2 older children are in 7th and 8th, and Ryan will go into the high school next year. But Art called me to say that Alexa was fine, that it was at the Sandy Hook, and then I watched television pretty much for the rest of the day. My Alexa was 7. Alexa Rose, she was born in June 2005. She lived all her life in Sandy Hook, Newtown, Connecticut. We had scheduled, because I've taken all my granddaughters, I have 6 of them, and taking them to the Nutcracker, and it just so happened that we had scheduled it for yesterday, and we met for breakfast at the Ritz-Carlton yesterday morning, and then walked over to Lincoln Center, and both my granddaughters, Kate and Alexa, had joined us, and my son came down, which was all planned. That was all planned. And actually, I had purchased those tickets back in August, and I think it was another thing I did right in having it scheduled for yesterday, but that was pure serendipity. Alexa seems to be fine. Actually, her older brother and sister took it much more difficult emotionally than she did. But what she didn't know yesterday, and I still don't know if she knows, that her neighbor and the little girl with whom she went on the bus, her name is Charlotte Bacon, whose picture is in today's Greenwich Time, is one of the victims. Now, as of yesterday afternoon, Alexa didn't know that her little girlfriend was one of the victims, so I don't know when they were going to tell her. The school is closed. The Board of Education in Newtown made a decision on Saturday to close the school. Expect that my granddaughter will go to a school in Monroe, for at least for the balance of this year, and they don't know when they're going to reopen the schools. In Newtown, they were closed today. I think they're going to be closed tomorrow. And I guess the funerals are going to begin this week, and it's really a tragic situation. Thank you very much for all the expressions I had from fellow members.
Wow.
Thank you, Art.
Tough to move from there, huh? I will at this time call on our clerk for routine applications for the evening.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move 4 routine applications. PD3, Police Department for $3,400. PW3, DPW for $64,000. ED1, Board of Education for $2,500. And ED2, Board of Education, also for $2,500.
Items have been moved,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Pellegrino. Discussion. Any discussion? Okay, if there's no discussion, I will call for the vote on the routine applications. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? 12-0-0. Moving on to our non-routine application, the first item coming before us is ED3. I will call on the chair of the Budget Committee, Mr. Pellegrino, for that item.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move ED3. This is from the Board of Ed. This is a release of conditions for $126,000.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Pellegrino, seconded by Mr. Finger. Discussion.
If I can give the
Mr.
report
Chairman?
from the Budget Committee first.
I would like, yes, if I can, Mr. Brady, we'll do a committee report, and then I will call on you.
It's very brief. This request will allow the Board of Ed to upgrade phone system hardware so that software upgrades will be possible. These upgrades are necessary to continue to receive manufacturer support. This is the second of 2 requests to upgrade the phone system. All Board of Ed schools and central office will have been upgraded. This item was voted on 4-0 by the Budget Committee in favor of.
Thank you, Mr. Pellegrino, and I will discussion. Mr. Brady.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move to postpone this item until January to examine it further. As a result of some other activities that I got involved with over the weekend, Mitel called me today to discuss phone systems, for commercial level phone systems. And they do offer basically a cloud-based system which includes all services that we think of as using a telephone, forwarding all the fancy push-button stuff. Necessary hardware, which in the case of their systems now is basically a desk set, nothing more. The software and support, including help desk type functions, that they provide entirely on a service basis, and the cost would run on a not to exceed $25 per line per month. I do not know what we're paying at the Board of Ed now. I don't know what the life is on this system that we have, but $126,000 is a non-trivial amount of money, and so I'd like to see this postponed so that it could be examined further.
Okay, we have a motion that's been seconded by Mr. Finger. Further discussion on the motion to postpone
It's to January.
to postpone till January.
If I may. I appreciate, Bob, you bringing this to our attention this evening, and I'm in support of postponing it till January.
Okay. On the motion to postpone, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining. So the motion to postpone until January is 12-0-0. That brings us to the next item. Mr.
Okay.
Pellegrino, GM1.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move GM1. This is a GEMS request to release conditions for $1,824,000.
Second.
Moved and seconded by Mr. Finger. Committee report?
Mr. Chairman, this is simply a request that releases the second half payment from the town of Greenwich to GEMS to support their operating budget. This is routine and is done every 6 months. The committee voted 4-0 in favor of this.
Discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Huffman.
I understand this is a routine. It's part of the semi-annual process we go through this, but I think it gives us an opportunity to say that it's perhaps time that we give a more careful look with the appropriate agencies as to this entire budget situation with regard to gyms. Because this is indeed a substantial amount, and the amounts look like they're moving to get even greater this next year.
This is off of our contractual obligation with them, and I happen to agree with you, Mr. Hoffman, on this one. I think we're probably going to see in the budget submissions coming up that, like any organization, the revenues versus expenses, and I think that's an issue that they're having probably as much as everybody else. Probably in this climate, I think GEMS relies a fair amount on some donations from the public sector, so I think they're probably seeing that too. But I think that is advice, and I would ask the budget committee, obviously, make sure we go through this in February. Mr. Pellegrino?
No, Randy, I welcome your input and your thoughts, and any member of the committee's input and thoughts as we go through the budget process. I'm all ears in terms of what we should be looking at, thinking about, and/or how we should approach it in any way differently than we have in the past.
Okay. On the motion to release, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining, 12-0-0.
Okay.
If we're going fast, it's because I'm under a directive from Maria. She doesn't feel well, so I always pay attention. Next, PR3.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move PR3. This is from our Parks and Recreation Department. This is a request for an additional appropriation related to Hurricane Sandy for $3,081,750.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Pellegrino, seconded by Mr. Finger. Committee report?
Mr. Chairman, the Director of Parks and Recreation, Joe Siciliano, and the Assistant Director, Mr. Tom Greco, who are with us this evening, came before the Budget Committee, and they requested funds to begin the process of repairing our beaches and infrastructures which were damaged by Hurricane Sandy. Specifically, the dollars would be allocated approximately as follows, and that being first, Greenwich Point, what I think of as Todd's Point, $844,750. Grass Island, $91,700. Island Beach, $1,307,100. Great Captain Island, $674,600. And Byram Marina, $163,600. The dollars were arrived at from a study done by a third-party consultant familiar with the town, who we've worked with in the past. The salient points of our discussion were, one, in particular for the islands, there's a need to begin work no later than March the 1st if they are to be open from the beginning of the beach season. And two, Director Siciliano made the point that there's competition for materials and contractors, and that we, the town, will be better served if we're early in the process, especially for our must-do priority projects. The third point that we discussed was that we would anticipate town insurance and/or FEMA funds will eventually reimburse us. The Budget Committee, in our discussions, focused on, one, the timing of reimbursements, two, the total amount of townwide damage and total amount that will be recovered, and three, priorities for the town. I think to date, in addition to this $3 million, the next item we have coming up, PR4, is also for storm-related damage of over $317,000. So that's approximately $3.5 million that we know of right now for Parks and Recreation. I believe in our discussions, Comptroller Mr. Minarski pointed out that we may have over $1 million for trees alone, and we still have yet to hear from the overtime for police, fire, and other departments. And in addition, we do not have any reports yet from Department of Public Works. So the total magnitude is not yet known, but I think it's not inconceivable that we are looking at $5 to $6 million, possibly more, in terms of total storm damage. Work is being done from pursuing our insurance claim. That work is already underway. And I believe FEMA has already had agents in town looking and documenting the story. In terms of the last point that the Budget Committee discussed, the priority for the town, when appropriate, we'd like to offer a subject to release condition on this request for additional appropriation. The vote at the Budget Committee was 4 in favor, unanimous, to proceed with this. Last point, it's important to proceed now so it can be on the docket for the RTM, so that the approvals will be in place so that Joe and Tom can go out, do what they need to do. Is this an RFP process at all for you, Joe?
There'll be several types of RFP, it'll be a best for bid and
Right.
service contract.
So it's key to get that in place. And if there's one last comment, I think that's fair from the Budget Committee unanimously, it's that we all felt that both Joe and Tom did an excellent job of being in front of us early and are on top of what needs to be done in order to meet the needs of what our citizens expect for the upcoming season, beach season. That's my report.
Okay, first of all, discussion on the item, and then we'll get to the motion to put a condition on the appropriation. Mr. Finger?
Yeah, I just, for the public who may be watching on Channel 79, the total appropriation requested here is $3,081,750. And the breakdown, I think, might be helpful. People were aware of what it was, or what it is. For storm damage at Greenwich Point, $844,750. For Grass Island, $91,700. Did you do that already?
We just did that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I was listening very questionably.
So,
But then, a question I do have is, the subject to...
Does this happen during budget meetings?
I always question what you're saying. So when we vote on this, will we vote and then have the conditions, or will the conditions occur before
no,
we vote?
I would say what we would have is the condition would be an amendment to the item on the call, so the condition is attached with the approval.
Well, the Budget Committee approved the item with a condition. And so I
Correct.
think the report coming to us from the Budget Committee has the condition. And if we're voting on the item as brought
Right.
to us by the Budget Committee, it's the item with its condition.
Right. So that's why I said, I think what we do is discuss the item and the merits of it, and then I would call for the condition on it. No vote until we get the condition on it.
Exactly. Thank you.
Further discussion on the item? If not, I will call Mr. Pellegrino to talk about the condition that the committee discussed.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move the following condition. Subject to release upon receipt and approval by the Board of Estimate and Taxation of respective bids, period. Now, if I may discuss it. We actually had a fairly lengthy discussion about how to word this, because our concern was we absolutely want to do this work. We're going to be reimbursed for it, but we were very concerned about the prioritization given the total demand on the town, its employees, staff, et cetera, as well as other resources that are brought to bear. So we were hoping is because the magnitude of the storm hasn't even been tallied up yet, that we want to make sure that the administration has enough time to get all inputs so that they can decide how they want to proceed in terms of prioritization. And then hopefully that's conveyed back to us so that when Joe comes back for the release of conditions, we'll then have a sense of how are we spending the money and in what sense of priority we're spending the money. That was our rationale.
Ms. Tarkington?
Yes, and I'd just like to add that also we talked about how it would be bid, whether it would be bid by site, which both Mr. Pellegrino and Mr. Finger have just elaborated on, or whether by trade. and I think there was a lot of discussion that it might be bid on by trade. But the point here was to have, when they do come back, to prioritize what they feel is most important in terms of the timing.
Okay. Mr. Raymer?
Yeah, I mean, there were, I think we spoke about there being 4 possible choke points here. The very laudable thing that was taking place through our Director of Parks and Rec was this ability to try and get on top of the problem quickly, to try and get ahead of the curve. And I compliment Mr. Siciliano for having, for evidently doing that. But what is happening is that we're lunging forward with an approval process without yet knowing what difficulties his department will encounter on the availability of contractors. Secondly, the availability of materials. Thirdly, their ability to supervise, or the town's ability generally perhaps, to supervise the number of projects that may be coming forward. And lastly, what other demands for dollars will the town be facing? And so the process is that by approving this with a condition, it affords the opportunity for Mr. Siciliano to go out and solicit the bids and begin to get a feeling on the availability of contractors and materials. At the same time, during that same period of time, we'll be getting a feel from these other departments as to what are the cash demands that the storm damage is imposing on the town because of that. And then in the overall, what's our ability to supervise all of that? By the time Mr. Siciliano is coming back seeking the release of funds from the condition, we'll probably know each of those 4 things and be able to make a more measured judgment about, are we just releasing all of it? Are we doing this in a staged way? Are we doing only some of this work? We'll understand much better. But this affords him the ability to get out there into the marketplace, hopefully ahead of others, so that we can reach contracts and pin down materials and things and be able to get this our problems here under control before perhaps some of the municipalities on the coast of New Jersey, the coast of New York, the south coast of Long Island, et cetera, are competing with us for these contractors and materials.
That leads me, if I may, for Mr. Menarsky, the controller. So you anticipate funding these from?
The big one that's been named is the capital non-recurring.
So in the capital non-recurring, you'll fund it out of there, and when it's reimbursed, time frame, 12 months, 24 months?
There's 3 areas that go back into. A portion of it will go into general fund. The bulk of the insurance recovery is applicable to this, go back into the capital non-recurring. And then there's the golf course piece.
Gotcha.
The 3 areas that the
Okay.
insurance reimbursements and the FEMA reimbursements will go.
Time frame on?
Insurance, anyway.
The only thing that's certain is we're promised a advance payment of $225,000 should be coming in any day.
Okay.
And that's against the tree claim.
Got it. So what we're going to have to do is, if we commit to this, if we get to March and they're ready to go to hire this, it's going to be an interesting timing as we do the capital model going forward. Okay. Any further?
Well, to discuss that briefly, it's the real question as I see it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Peter and Roland, the town essentially is fronting the money here until we get reimbursed. So the question is, do we get reimbursed 100% on the dollar, or are we going to end up 90% on the dollar, 80% on the dollar? That I don't have a clue.
No, what we're doing is I'm sorry.
No, that's one issue. The second issue then is how you ultimately are funding this. Because, then you got the question of, do you want to do a short-term note or something for a year until you get
No,
reimbursed?
I think we have the
et cetera?
fund balance to cover, but I think we need to be aware of that. If the reimbursement is 24 months out, 18 months out, 12 months out, I think we just need to be cognizant of that.
Well, what we do traditionally is, in the case of the B fund, which is the bonded projects, for example, we appropriate large amounts of money, approximately $8 to $10 million for the education each July and August. We front the money, and then when we borrow the money in January, we pay back the general fund.
Got it.
So we have traditionally, we have areas, sources, whether it's the general fund, the B fund, which is the bonded fund, or the capital non-recurring. We have cash available in the 3 areas. And basically, if it goes past June 30th, we just recognize it with we call it a due to and a due from, If you look at the CAFR, the financial report, it's known as accounts receivable and accounts payable between funds.
Okay, just checking. Okay, so,
Mr. Chairman.
Question?
oh, I'm sorry. Hello, Mr. Goldberg.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Mr. Siciliano, although these are early days, we're talking about prioritizing and what can get done. I think he was hinting at the Budget Committee meeting that he sort of dealt with this sort of project before, and he didn't seem to think that there would be any big impediments to getting these things done by June. And I wondered if you could give us some idea of that. Is this going to be a big competition for resources, and we should realistically think in 2 years, or is there a very good chance that we can do these projects by end of May or June?
I think, as I said at the Budget Committee meeting, 1992, we had a significant storm similar to this. This is of a greater magnitude. I would say that was about 70% of what we are seeing right now. At the end of the day, because of timing conditions, we would need to commence with most of this work by March 1st, especially the offshore island work. The offshore island work is, there's lost time in transporting. There's complications in, working offshore. Even though it's only a little bit more than a mile offshore, it still creates this whole transport issue, delivery issue of materials, et cetera. So we'll put together a tight specification and a tight bid package, which will require a 6-day work week in order to get this done, have a shot at getting this done for opening day. The other outside factors outside of my control that I can't put into the contract really will be availability of contractors, the scope that can handle this type of project, and also the materials that will be available. Obviously, concrete is concrete, it will be available, but the lumber, the timber that we're going to need to do this dock restoration and rebuilding will be on my radar screen. I can tell you that in 1992, when the game was a little bit different, we actually ordered the materials as we're sitting here right now prior to having an appropriation because we needed the materials. And we were in direct competition with others who were in a similar situation. That has since changed. There was a decision that the first selectman at the time, the chairman of the BET, and the chairman of the RTM all were involved, all kind of said, well, we got to do what we have to do, and we at least we're on the hook for the materials. But eventually, we put the whole package together. We secured a contractor. We're gonna give it our best opportunity here to be open for the summer session. Now, I cannot guarantee. I mean, I'm saying, we're going to start March 1st. We're going to give a target date of June 1st, especially for the island work. The inland work, I'm not too overly concerned about. We may use multiple contractors there, where we have a masonry contractor, a fence contractor, somebody to do ground restoration, those types of things. Those we have a lot of folks on service, purchasing service contracts, where we may be able to extend those contracts out a little bit and be able to use people that we already currently work with, who have the insurance, have the bonding, have everything in place already. We just need to come up with a pricing. So we'll be working with purchasing in the near future to discuss that, and we'll solicit the help of our town administrator to try to get that worked out. We won't, until the funds are released, we won't spend the money, but we may come back and say that we have a fence contractor that it's not part of a big package, but it's the fence contractor that we use today, and here's his pricing schematic, and we're looking for the release of those funds. To really answer your question, I mean, my only effort here is to come out first and to get in front of the curve of trying to get some of these contractors secured, such as the offshore island contractors. It's the most critical thing we have to do, and as we leave, a positive vote from this meeting and move to the RTM, we are going to be talking to our consultant to start to deal with some of the paperwork that has to transpire in order to move this to the next step, because realistically, it can't wait until January 22nd, if that's the RTM meeting, to give the approval to their engineer to start to get the paper flowing so that we can get some of these items spec'd out and at least file at the state level for the permits. So we are going to be out there a little bit. I'm confident that we can deal with that, but we will not do any of the construction phase until we have your approval to move forward.
Thank you. Further discussion of PR3?
Mr. Chairman.
1 second. Mr. You have a follow-up question?
For Mr. Mynarski, I guess, because we were talking about cash flow and how that would work. Mr. Mynarski just mentioned the $325,000 progress payment we're getting from AIG, I think, on the trees, right? And the point of that is that we are not going, and I think this came up in the audit committee as well in a question, we're not using the cash coming in on this tree insurance policy to plant each individual tree again. We might not do that. In other words, that cash flow is not going to go back out again in trees immediately. So that's part of a cash flow in the form of these progress payments that we can use for, in the meantime.
Mr. Johnson?
To Joe, just clarification, if the RTM meeting's not till January 22nd, you said, does that really put you in a bind? You know, trying to get something started March 1st?
Well, it's what we have, to work with. It will be what we spend our time working on between now and the 21st.
So you'll put together RFPs or whatever process.
We can start to do we can
subcontractors.
start to do some of the paperwork, get the RFPs together, get the permit documents together. I mean, we're going to be on the hook for some funding for the engineer here, but there's no other choice. I mean, if we wait till the 22nd, that just puts us a month out from now, and we will put ourselves in a very compromised position.
'Cause I would think, you know, specifically the subcontractors that do marine work, like the
Yeah.
piers, there are probably not too many of those around
Right.
that can do this, so.
Yeah,
Challenging.
it'll be interesting. I'm going to, just on for discussion purposes, meet with our marine engineer over the holiday week, and he's going to check and see what the activity is like out there already. I mean, I know some of the private clubs where they don't have to go for, they don't have this process of appropriation, have already engaged. You know, there's a few that have already engaged.
And a number of the yacht clubs in the Long Island Sound area had severe damage, so I'm
Right.
sure they're all rushing to get these subcontractors lined up.
So they've already started that work at some locations, and so these marine contractors, are already obligated.
Okay. Mr. Brady, did you have your hand?
I did. I'm not sure I really need this. Just a note for the record, in the engineer's report, it refers to damage area 10, the Old Greenwich Yacht Club. These are town, not Old Greenwich Yacht Club assets.
You're correct, they're town assets. I guess,
It
his
identifies
brief-
where the work has to be done.
right, his
Just-
brief discussion, it's not a
Yes.
yacht club issue, right?
Just so that the record's clear.
Anything further? Okay, then, I'll call for the vote on PR3 with the condition added, offered by the Budget Committee. So when you're voting for the appropriation and the condition that's been highlighted. So with that, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Okay, 12-0-0.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, that brings us to PR4, Parks and Rec. This is an additional appropriation request for $317,544.44.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Pellegrino, seconded by Mr. Finger. Committee report?
Okay, this request, also presented by Mr. Siciliano and Mr. Greco, is to cover the costs associated with Hurricane Sandy that have been incurred to date. The largest components are as follows: tree crews, $163,091, overtime, and by the way, the tree crews were third-party tree crews. Overtime, $107,968, and machinery maintenance, $24,773. The committee voted for this unanimously, 4-0.
Second.
Discussion.
These are essentially expenses that have been incurred, and this appropriation is to essentially pay the bills that we have before us.
Got it. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining?
Okay.
12-0. Moving on.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'd now like to move NW8. This is a release of conditions for Project Renew. The amount involved here is $22,476,000. There are two conditions subject to your approval. I'd like to move each one separately because that's how the Budget Committee took up the matter.
Fine.
If I may. The first condition was subject to release by the Board of Estimate and Taxation upon the receipt of a letter from the Connecticut Department of Social Services acknowledging the increased cost in construction of $2.4 million. This condition was taken up, reviewed, and it was approved 4-0 by the Budget Committee.
And the second condition?
Okay. Do you want to have discussion on that?
I'll open it up to both.
Okay, all right.
Both conditions on releasing the $22 million.
Condition was subject to release by the Board of Estimate and Taxation upon receipt and acceptance of a revised strategy that specifies actions that can be taken to address the increased operating shortfalls of the long-range plan. Mr. Chairman, this second portion I'm going to go into in detail. Specifically, I think it's important for the record that we state what I think are the 5 key topics that we discussed. And this goes to the strategy that the board and Nathaniel Witherall has discussed and has put forth to us for purposes of seeking our release of this condition. One was to explore new revenue opportunities in the areas of hospice care, visiting nurse services, geriatric examinations, outpatient rehabilitation services, home health care services, excuse me, and relationships with assisted living facilities. Second, a desire on Nathaniel Witherall's part to renegotiate town services. The third is a request that the town endorse and participate in the steps necessary to secure historic income tax credits. And I believe that that's at both the federal and at the state level. The fourth topic was to work with Mr. Alcava to attempt to obtain changes in union contracts through a negotiated process. And finally, the fifth key strategy is to investigate steps necessary for converting the Nathaniel Witherall ownership to a 501c3 organization upon the completion of Project Renew and a reasonable period of operation. Mr. Chairman, there were several other topics, but I don't think that they merit perhaps as much importance as signaling out those 5. The Budget Committee had a lengthy and sincere discussion. I think it's fair to say that all 4 members of the committee support Nathaniel Witherall and Project Renew, while at the same time, all 4 members felt they had a fiduciary responsibility to address, question, and highlight the impact Project Renew and Nathaniel Witherall could have on townwide financial demands if either the Friends of Nathaniel Witherall are not able to raise projected contributions of $7 million and/or operating conditions deteriorate and the town is required to subsidize Nathaniel Witherall for more than has been modeled or budgeted for fiscal year 14 and thereafter. In the end, I think despite well-grounded concerns, the committee voted in favor, unanimously, in favor of releasing the conditions, thereby clearing the way for our vote this evening and entering into the contracts so that we can begin Project Renew immediately. I think if I can just add one more comment, I think on behalf of the committee, we wish to thank the board and the building committee for all that they've done and that they continue to do so. This has been a project that has been discussed and worked upon for, I think, a decade, if not longer. And I think tonight, subject to our vote, we will be moving forward with this project. And for my own personal comment, I wish you Godspeed in getting it done and doing it well. That's the committee report.
Discussion. Mr. Norton?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. As I think everybody knows, I represent this board and the building committee for Project Renew. And I made comments at the budget committee meeting last Thursday evening, and I'd like to repeat those comments because I believe sincerely in them, and I think that it is for both the community as well as for Nathaniel Witherell. Since the year 2000, the RTM has considered this item 4 times, and every time that they have considered it, they have voted to maintain Nathaniel Witherell as a town facility and a town department. There's been concern about whether or not the RTM, in its wisdom, understands completely the complexity of the project as well as all the issues. But I think the RTM looks to us, the Board of Estimate Taxation, as the financial stewards of the town, and they're looking to us to fund the project. And I strongly support and encourage all members to vote for this item this evening.
Thank you. Discussion? Further discussion? I too would like to, as we embark on this $22 million, I commend the Budget Committee for your caution where this could go, the exposure the town could have. Obviously, healthcare in general is probably a national subject, if nothing else. In 1999, in following appropriation statement, I noticed that the Nathaniel Witherell Board that year had a number of their expenses that was bigger than their number of their budget. And I remember it was just down the hallway, a meeting that was called, and I said, what's going on here? What are we doing here? And everybody said, who are you? And I said, I'm an RTM member from District 8. And since then, Nathaniel Witherell has gotten a lot of attention, subject to releases, quarterly reporting, a new board, incredible oversight. And through this process, we've always known that even with the work of the special committee, this operation really being a standalone was going to be a challenge. We've seen it now, even in the latest models and renderings. But as we sit here today, I think we have done, the BET has done everything we can to say, look, that the capital costs are, that they're just, we don't see them being able to run those numbers. And now the operating, because of the revenue changes and what have you. And I think we've been as transparent and open with the RTM as we can. I know I can't tell you how many committee meetings I've attended just recently. So I think it's out there. But in general, I think this is one of the Greenwich things, where not every community has a town-owned nursing home, and we just chose to be in the business many years ago. It's modified, it's changed a little bit, but the facility, we probably weren't, like some of our other buildings in town, we probably weren't maintaining it to the levels that we should have. And we're in our normal mode, kind of doing catch-up. But I commend all the BET members for all the work on this, and the Nathaniel Witherell board members, and Lloyd, I can't wait not to see you anymore. Everywhere we go, Lloyd gets us, and we have to backpedal. As I said to Mr. Fox, one of the newer members, when I walked in, I don't even like seeing you. You cost more money every time I see you. But with that, I think we're off and doing the right thing. Further discussion, Ms. Tarkington?
Yeah, I would, as many know who work with me, I've been a strong supporter of Nathaniel Witherell as a town department and its long-term care business. And I commend Mr. Ormsby, who has spearheaded this project for the last 8.5 years, together with the other board members and at a later point, the building committee. But, I'd like to emphasize that Nathaniel Witherell is the town's second largest department, second only to the Board of Education, and now as it moves ahead with this project, has a huge responsibility to the other departments. Witherell is more than double the size of the fire department, 33% larger than DPW, at least 1/4% larger than Parks and Rec, and the police department. And so there's going to be some difficult times. I think the losses on this program are front-ended. There were agreed-upon allocations in terms of costs. That was done with the accounting firms. While this addresses really a spectacular rehab facility, as most know, this is not going to address really the long-term care rooms or the issues with the pavilion, which were in previous plans to be demolished. So there's still a lot of work to be done, not only to proceed with this project, but also to address these other issues and then to really, on a much closer basis, blend all of what will be happening here with the rest of the town. But anyway, as I said in the Budget Committee, extend my support for the project and whatever I can do to help it move ahead smoothly, particularly as there will be other staffing demands that this new program will require. You have my support, and it's taken, again, I think 8.5 years to get to this point from the time Mr. Ormsby got involved with this project. So all the best.
With that, for the discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Mr. Ormsby, get your shovel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Norton?
could I ask Mr. Fox, are we still having a meeting tomorrow morning? That's for the contracts to proceed, because we'll be signing 19 contracts tomorrow, or authorizing 19 contracts. They have to be signed by December 31. Thank you.
Got it. Number 4 on the agenda, Assessor's Report. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the BET. I'd like to present the Assessor's Report for December 2012. And I'd like to highlight a few items, if I may. First of all, the 2011 supplemental motor vehicle is complete. The tax bills have been created, and they will be sent out this Wednesday by the tax collector's office, and they shall be due February 1st. The tax revenues from the motor vehicle supplemental will be roughly $1,089,563 prior to adjustments. Okay. Secondly, we've settled a couple more court cases. We've settled one residential, one commercial, and in addition, 4 commercial cases will be withdrawn as well. And finally, we expect to complete the 2013 grand list on schedule by the end of January 31st. So far, we're on schedule to complete that timely. Okay. Anybody have any questions?
Mr.
Yes.
Norton?
Does your schedule on, I don't know what page it is, indicate that the settlements?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in the December 12 number at the bottom, that includes the settlements?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Ms. Tarkington, I know you have something under our item 8. Would you like to do that now?
Whatever's your preference, I just wanted to bring up that point.
Yeah, I think your point's there, and I think, yes, would you?
Okay. Lauren, I think in Mr. Fingers or in my meetings with you, you've emphasized the importance of moving ahead with the RFP to update or replace Munis. And you've shared with us that this is really, that the new technology is a priority. And you've made it made sure it's a priority on the IT list. Also, you've commented on the time frame that we really need to get this accomplished by May 31 if it's to be used for the billing process for the tax collector's department, and also for as the basis before you proceed with updating the revaluation software. And as we all know, and this board approved, the capital budget has money in it for next year to begin with the reval. So can you just give us an update on that? I mean, we'll do anything that we can to support you in that effort, but...
It was my understanding that looking at the new administrative tax collector assessor software was on hold until I arrived here. I'm here. The RFP, from what I understand, is with the tax collector, and that is a priority for me to get that, and for the assessor and the collector to get that out as soon as we possibly can. I have been investigating what probably are our potential options as far as other software vendors for this. So hopefully, once we do put the RFP out, we can get this completed in a timely manner. But yes, it is imperative that we get this done quickly, otherwise it's going to require us to wait another additional year. We can't, there's only certain times when the assessor and the collector can convert your information in a proper manner.
So do we need a little reminder or?
Well, persuasion would be
Okay, we'll get to that. Mr. Norton first.
It's my understanding that if we have this approved in this first 6 months of the year 2013, that you will run a duplicate next year? Is that?
We could do it a number of different ways. Depending on the timing of such, I could create the 2013 grand list on the new software.
Well, you're going to do that right now, aren't you? By February?
No, I'm completing the 2012 grand list.
Okay.
Yeah, due in July 13, tax bill. I could create the 2013 grand list solely on that, on the new software, or I can run parallel systems depending on when we do it. If we do it sometime after January 31st or in February, I can actually run parallel systems so that if something does happen, we certainly will be able to match and make sure everything.
Wouldn't it be prudent, based upon when you get all that approved, that we do run parallel for next year?
Mm-hmm. We could do it both. It depends if we would have to then extend our contract with Munis an additional year too as well, which is, we have the agreement in place with them to do it on a yearly basis. So we I believe we actually have the ability to change that out with the 90-day notice.
Thank you.
Mr. Pellegrino.
I'm sorry. Could you share with me again, because I think I missed it, where does the RFS stand?
I believe the
You said with the tax collector?
The RFP is sitting on the, yes.
Well, what is it doing in the tax collector's office?
Because it's, they both share it, so.
It's to be, well, both of us are reviewing
Okay,
this.
so do we have a deadline for when that's going to be out of the tax collector's office?
I don't believe there's a deadline as of yet.
Who's running the program? Who's running this
I
process?
think the issue here is that the assessor's office has done all it needs to do,
Right.
and it needs concurrence from the tax collector, where the tax collector's office has to do their portion. And Ms. Elliott is saying that she can't do anything until the tax collector does what he needs to do. So it's been
How long?
a fair amount of time that it's been sitting with the tax collector's department.
How long has it been sitting with the tax collector's department?
Why don't we? Okay, so
Well, that's-
let's do this.
What was that, over a year?
Over a year.
So there's got to be a cross jumper wire here. So let's do it this way.
I'm willing to do it any way you'd like,
No,
Mr. Chairman.
let's try this. Tax collector, Ms. Tarkington, would you be so kind as to check into this for me and give an email back, and maybe with John Curry also and Peter, see where we are with this? Because obviously, this was something both departments were saying we needed to do, right? So there's got to be some confusion there for this reason. But I think we need to just maybe put our finger on this and see where it goes. And
Sure.
Mr. Finger will be involved also.
Oh, absolutely, without question.
I will just.
Whether that was your intent or not.
I got it.
It certainly would have been mine, let's put it this way.
Okay. Oh, boy.
Is that enough, Mr. Chairman?
I was just wondering who's going to call them first, because I see it coming. Okay, so we definitely need to follow through on this. There's no doubt, because I'm not that familiar with it, but to run Munis for a year and this, I don't know, but it doesn't sound like.
Well, also importantly, we need this system in place before we can put in place a new updated ProVal, which is the revaluation software. So it becomes especially critical for the assessor's office to make sure this project moves ahead in a timely basis now. We could get away with letting the date slip before, but not now as we begin to face a reval.
Look at Mr. Finger. I think you've been hanging around Mr. Pellegrino too much. It's starting to rub off. Here we go. Okay, so thank you. We will
Thank you.
definitely see what is missing in that. Oh,
Move to accept it.
yes, I would love to hear a motion to accept the,
Oh, I so move.
Second.
yes, yes, yes.
Yes, got it.
I just wanted to put it.
Item number 5, Controller's Report.
All in favor?
I'm sorry, Assessor's Report. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining. I didn't expect that one. I didn't know that was exactly coming like that. Mr. Minarski?
If it's okay with the chairman of the BET, comment to that, because I, along with John Crary, Boris, Todd, and Ted Gortney, actually worked on this over a year ago, and Lauren's open remarks where it was purposely stopped because Ted Gortney had put in his papers to retire. So the comment about being over a year, there was an effort to stop it, to time it with the arrival. I'm not going to comment on the second part of it, but there is an urgency to slot this in so that it gets done with parallel systems in the next 6 to 8 months. As far as the controllers report, I'll start with that, or end with that. There are a couple items on here that will be covered later. There's the Harbor Vest Fund, and I'll not comment on it now. And then there's the annual approval of the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, accompanied with the single audits for the state and federal. And then there's the management letter, which will be covered later. We have the annual financing of the capital projects, and we're scheduled to go to the credit rating people on January 8th and January 9th. We have the annual discussions through Arts Group, the BET Audit Committee, with the Bill Lindsay from Independent Bond Council, IBIC, Independent Bond and Investment Consultants, to get a feel for the market. And the highlights of it are, we have a $40 million band issue, which is coming due in January. I think it's January 27th. And we're going to take $22 million of it. It's $22 million's in the second year of borrowing, and it's going to be permanently borrowed with a general obligation bond. We're going to take $18 million and add $37 million to it, and we're going to have a $55 million band issue. And the highlights of the bands are the two large projects, is the MESA, Greenwich High School, MESA. We've got about $8 million in there, and then there's the Project Renew, which you gave the okay tonight. We've got about $15 million in the first tranche, and probably, if everything goes smoothly, the second piece will probably be around $12 million in the 2014. The $3,600,000 has been previously borrowed, and the second piece, the $1,326,000, will be in the bond issue. So that's, again, and what's reflected in the controller's report is the rates we had last year. We had a blended rate of a little over 1.5 on the general obligation bond. Blended meaning there's pieces in there. There's the general fund, there's sewer improvement, and there's Nathaniel Witherall. It's a blend of 5-year amortization and 20-year amortization. And then you could see we got a $40 million bands for 13 basis points last year. So it looks good for the market for borrowing. So it's a good time, and hopefully this January and January 2014 we'll be able to basically fund the big projects that are out there. And I think for now, once Hamilton Avenue's paid off with cash, Glenville School has 2 more years.
Something like that.
We've got MESA just in the Nathaniel Witherall be basically borrowed in the next 2 years. So we've got the big projects all basically financed within the next 2 years. And I'll open it up to questions on financing or anything else in the controller's report.
And I'll move we accept your report.
Second. Whoa, hold on. Mr. Huffman.
One of the things that came in the package that was just available to us at the end of the week, and I guess it just been a few days ago prior to that, before the audit committee and the budget committee, are the annual reports and the management letter. And we had a a brief discussion about this a year ago. The difficulty that we find is that really doesn't give us an appropriate amount of time to review these the way I feel it should be reviewed. And I know that the auditors can't really start until you're at a point at which you're closing out the year's books. But I didn't know whether you'd had conversations with them, and I know this is a different auditing firm than had been previously working on it. But have you talked to them about ways in which they can accelerate that process any to get us at least a draft in advance of the period of time that we're now seeing it?
The first draft was done, I think, November 29th. I don't believe we opened that up to anybody outside of the audit committee. And I'm going to defer to Art. But to answer your question is, we are probably, with the exception of the city of Stamford, which by charter is required to have their audit done by September 30th, we're way ahead of everybody else. The state statute requires that you have a finished CAFR, a comprehensive annual financial report, by December 31st to the Office of Policy and Management. If you can't make it by December 31st, you have to apply for extension by December 1st. We're way ahead of everybody else as far as accelerating it. Now, the requirement prior to Art coming in is we used to issue and vote on the CAFRs in the month of January. So this is actually very early in the process. I don't know if Art, if you want to add something.
The audit committee had a special meeting on the 29th of November, and it was an audit committee meeting, but it was extended to all members of the BDT, and at that point, we did receive a draft. This is the first year in which we have received a draft. I insisted that we have a draft from our auditors before the audit committee reviews it, which they did last Thursday, but we did have a draft, and actually the draft didn't change between the 29th of November and last Thursday. Same item.
If that's the best that we can do, I will be sure that
I think
I can see the draft as soon as it's available.
I think maybe one of the shortcomings in the process, and correct me if I'm incorrect, Art, is we don't share the draft as far as, because it's draft, we don't distribute it. For example, we don't put it in any packages or anything like that. But I think what we could do, Randy, in the future is we could send to the full BET and maybe the Selectman's office the draft probably in November of next year.
That would be very helpful.
And then we welcome comments to be passed on to the outside auditors.
The reason in which we're approving the CAFR in December is to comply with securities law.
Yeah,
Because we're using that as we go out to the capital markets in the month of January.
exactly.
Further discussion?
I make the motion now?
Back to Mr. Norton's motion to accept the controller's report for the month of December.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining.
Treasurer's report?
Treasurer's report would be followed next.
Make a motion to accept the treasurer's report?
I'd like, before we do that, before we vote on it, I'd like to have everybody, bring everybody's attention.
Okay, hold on one second. It's moved and seconded. Now discussion.
Yeah.
Discussion on treasurer's report.
Right,
Mr. Norton.
the cash forecast report that's
Jeff.
included in this, I just want to bring that to everybody's attention. I think that's a very important document.
Further discussion on treasurer's report? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining. 1-0. BET standing committee reports. I actually, if I could, I would ask for a motion to take up the first item under new business right now, why we have Assistant Town Attorney McLaughlin in the room. I would entertain a motion to take that item up now.
I so move that we move that item forward.
Seconded.
Seconded by Mr. Finger. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
We'll get back to item 7 when we get done, but I just want to take this item up. Okay, let's see. Mr. Bedrosian.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move a resolution to the full BET on agreements for investment by the retirement fund with HarborVest Partners in an amount not to exceed $10 million are hereby approved.
Okay, so you're
I'll second that.
moved and seconded by Ms. Tarkington. Do we have any other committee reports? Mr. Raymer?
Yeah, the Law Committee reviewed this item from the standpoint of the documents being in legal order. We reviewed them with the assistance of Attorney McLaughlin, and the Law Committee voted 2-0 to find the documents to be in legal order for an investment not to exceed $10 million.
Okay, and no other committee report. Discussion.
I can give I'd like to, if I may, Mr.
Please
Chairman, give an overview of the
Please
process that the Retirement Board and the Investment Advisory Committee went through in terms of the overview of the HarborVest Fund investment. So in the full BET packet, you'll all see 3 large documents. One of them is a HarborVest PowerPoint deck, which was a copy of the full presentation that HarborVest made to the Retirement Board back in September. Sean Goldrick and I, as liaisons, were part of that meeting and participated in it. This was one of many meetings that the Retirement Board had vetting and reviewing various different alternatives for private equity fund-of-fund managers to be considered. For numerous reasons, which I will elaborate on momentarily, HarborVest was the group that stood out amongst others and was therefore reviewed by and proposed by the Retirement Board for our review. There are a number of elements to consider. First of all, for everyone's edification, HarborVest is a firm that's existed for 30 years as an independent, privately owned firm who focuses solely as a business on investing in other private equity funds. This is what they do as a business. They manage over $30 billion. They're SEC registered. They're based nearby in Boston. They're a U.S. entity through which is being contemplated this investment. And importantly also, given their business, they're very well regarded and highly regarded as being very communicative with groups that have invested in them. Importantly, for all of us to be aware of, a private equity fund-of-fund investment is an investment in a fund manager, in this case HarborVest, that in turn goes out and seeks to deploy that capital in a series of other private equity partnerships. So this is not a single partnership that we would ultimately be investing in. We'd be investing in one vehicle that would then go out and vet and invest in probably 20-plus partnerships over a period of time. The rationale for that and the benefit that we found in reviewing this was that it created important diversification for the Retirement Board. Rather than investing in one partnership with the hopes of it performing, we have diversification over 20-plus partnerships. This also, in terms of the size of the commitment, up to $10 million maximum, fits within the Retirement Board's 20% plus allocation to private partnerships. Also importantly, just doing the math at full allocation of that 10 million commitment, that would represent approximately 3% of the pension fund's current assets of about $330 million. So in terms of putting it in proportion to the overall allocation. Another important element that we reviewed at the Investment Advisory Committee was the fact that numerous other well-regarded pension funds, public pension funds, have been longstanding investors in these and other HarborVest partnerships. So it's a process that had gone through tried and true by other neighboring municipalities as well. We reviewed and voted at the Investment Advisory Committee to 301, one abstention, in favor of recommending this review to the full BET.
Okay, further discussion? Ms. Tarkington?
I would just like to add to Mr. Bedrosian's report that there are actually 3 different funds in this HarborVest investment. A buyout fund, a credit opportunities fund, and a venture capital fund. Each of them have a separate partnership agreement. Each of them has a specific dollar up to which the town will invest, and each of them will also have a letter of support that we will discuss at a
Okay.
shortly.
Mr. Norton?
I'm going to defer until after Mr. McLaughlin makes his presentation.
I think you have a presentation.
Good evening, Gene McLaughlin, Assistant Town Attorney. This HarborVest agreement, limited partnership, was reviewed by our department. We sent a letter to the Law Committee November 14th with copies to most of the members of the Investments Committee, highlighting the issues that are presented in an investment of this type by the Retirement Board. The parts of that are of note in the headings that we discussed in the letter are that this is a Delaware limited partnership, and it is going to be governed under the operative law of Delaware. The particular limited partnership itself and the general partner are not regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, but the investing partner that will be the investment advisor to the fund is a registered investment advisor and is registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. In the letter, we also discussed the term, risk, and illiquidity of the fund, that this is a private equity investment, the standard of care that will be exercised by the general partner, that is generally a negligence standard. In others, there's gross negligence, so this is better than that one. There's indemnification of the general partner, but it's limited to the town's investment in the fund, and that can include return of distributions that have been made. Under the financial control, the fund is required to be audited yearly by a nationally recognized independent accounting firm, and they had retained the custodial services of Merrill Lynch for the custodian of the direct investments in companies and stock distributions. That was discussed. I think that was sent to the investment committee prior to the investment committee issuing the report. In the meantime, I reviewed a compendium of side letters that had been issued to other investors in prior closings on this particular fund. And based on that review, I was able to cull out of those side letters provisions that would be applicable to the town of Greenwich that I thought were favorable to the town, and was able to negotiate inclusion of those provisions into a side letter. I'll run through. This is another letter, December 7th, to the Law Committee. What is accomplished in this side letter is that the town has what's called the most favored nation provision, that if another investor gets a more favorable provisions, the town will have an opportunity to also take advantage of that provision. Another section, and all these side letters are meant to clarify certain points in the investment documents and the limited partnership agreement. Another benefit to the town by the side letter is that clarifies that the investment discretion will be exercised by HarborVest Partners, the registered investment advisor and registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Another provision that we included is we convinced the HarborVest to treat the town as if it would be an ERISA partner, ERISA being the Employment Retirement Income Security Act, which protects funds that are subject to that law. In the event that this fund does reach a 25% threshold of other ERISA investors, the town will have the same protections under ERISA law that those ERISA plans will have. And they include the fiduciary standards, bonding, and investment manager requirements that are set forth under ERISA. That may not and probably will not occur because this fund is designed and intended not to admit the 25% threshold that's required to kick that provision into place. Nevertheless, I think it was an important thing to have in case that threshold is reached. Another provision recognizes the indemnification restrictions of the town charter, and a question that had been asked in the course of this review is who was the nationally recognized auditor. It was confirmed to be Ernst & Young. And another paragraph lists the insurance and bonding requirements that are presently carried by HarborVest. So we recommended that this side letter be included in the approval of the documents so that it be included in the closing. The documents have been signed off by Mr. Mynarski as the controller and are being held in escrow pending approval of this board because the next and possibly last closing is tomorrow. So that's my presentation. If you have any questions.
Just have one question. Mr. Pellegrino? I'm sorry. Gene, just more out of curiosity. From start to finish, how much energy do you have to put into this in order to get these letters into a condition from your point of view are acceptable to the town?
I'd say it. Sometimes it's an issue of actually getting the other documents. HarborVest was cooperative in providing the documents, even though the final closing has not occurred. They have to be reviewed. Going back, we reviewed the private placement memorandum, the limited partnership agreement, other supporting documentation. That can be hundreds of pages, so it takes some time to go through. We have developed, as you may recognize, kind of a format now, the way we report these, so that's speeding along to some extent. But it can take significant hours to get the thing put together. And would you like an estimate of what that hours are?
I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah.
Take about a week of your life?
Oh, I would say easily, yes.
Maybe
Yes.
2 weeks.
Possibly 2 weeks, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ms. Tarkin?
Mr. Chairman, we had also talked about approving the side letter, the documentation. I don't know whether you want that brought forth and to be approved in advance,
How we'll proceed
or
with that.
and then approve the actual investment itself. It's a matter of process, whichever you prefer.
Yes. So the item before us is the Harbor vesting agreement. Then you have the Oakdale.
Oak Tree.
I'm sorry, Oak Tree. What are we need to put that on the agenda to approve that side letter?
I recommend for Oak Tree, which is a separate partnership, that we do add that, Mr. Chairman, to the agenda for discussion tonight.
Gotcha. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Well, so I would say the best thing is let's vote on the first item. Then I'll entertain a motion to add an item to the agenda. That'll need a 2/3 vote, obviously, to go through, and then we can have discussion and motion on that. Sure.
I wanted to comment on HarborVest before you bring it to a vote.
Oh, please.
I had voted against Oak Tree. I was the sole vote that had voted against Oak Tree. And I will vote against HarborVest as well, but I think it warrants appropriately when a person votes against, they should offer comment. My vote against is not a vote against the reputable quality of HarborVest as the private equity investment. It's not meant to be criticism of the very fine people that work on our retirement board, nor our liaisons with the retirement board, nor our investment advisory committee. Mr. Simon, Lawrence Simon, attended our law committee meeting. These are my own comments, by the way. It has nothing to do with a law committee decision. And he commented that the strategy presently in place within the retirement board is to advance somewhat these alternative investments to about 20% of the portfolio, supplemented by about 5% of the portfolio in real estate investment. That's a little bit greater than the observation that was made approximately 2 months ago when we were discussing Oak Tree, where the target at that point, as I understood it, was about 15% of the portfolio. Mr. Simon commented that in the process of trying to understand more deeply the differences between the investment performance by this town compared to other municipalities, process was undertaken to try and observe what were the investment portfolios of some of our sister municipalities, and the discovery was made that were invested somewhat more heavily than Greenwich in these alternative forms of investment. And apparently part of the strategy change, if I understand it correctly, and I hope I'm not misquoting anybody, is to try and conform the investment strategies of Greenwich to be a little bit closer to the investment strategies of these other municipalities that seem to be performing somewhat better. Excuse me. If one looks back at Section 208 of the Charter, which is the section pursuant to which we're actually undertaking the review of this, it's an oddly reading section. It certainly starts at the outset and says that the control over the investment fund that constitutes the retirement fund is vested in an independent board, the retirement board. So clearly there's an intent by the draftsman not to have us picking and choosing stocks, but rather the specific investments really are the business of the retirement board. But then the section 208A, goes on to say that in the event that the retirement board chooses to make the decision to take a portion of its funds and put them into the hands of an entity who manages an investment portfolio on their behalf, so the direct picking of the investments is no longer being done by the retirement board, that selection of the entity of the fund is supposed to obtain the approval of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. Secondly, a sentence or two later, it says, and in addition, the instruments, the agreements by which these funds are entrusted, that too is the business of the BET. It's a little hard to understand exactly what's the philosophy that's behind it. I don't have a perfect view of it. I'm keenly aware that my own experience in investing is far less than the experience and wisdom and knowledge in investing of some of these other people that I referred to, including our liaisons at our investment advisory committee. But it is my take on it that I think it's the intention of the charter that an individual serving on the BET, such as myself, should be looking at the overall strategy from perhaps 50,000 feet. And if there's a feeling in that member of the BET that he's uncomfortable with the depth of investment in private equity at 20% plus 5%, including the real estate investment, that it's incumbent upon that person not to support that strategy. And so it's with that in mind, because I am in fact uncomfortable with 20% invested in private equity plus 5% in real estate. That to me is too deep into the high risk and return for high reward. I would rather have invested more conservatively, even if that would have meant that I would have taxed my citizens more heavily to meet our pension obligations in the face of a poorly responding rate of return on our fund. That would have been my strategy. And so just as I did as a sole lone dissenting vote on Oak Tree, even though I wasn't meaning to be criticizing Oak Tree, I will be voting against this investment, and not meaning to be critical of HarborVest as an entity. I'm critical of the overall strategy.
I'd like to respond. Or Mr. Goldrick.
Mr. Goldrick.
I want to respond.
I'd like to note that Mr. Raymer has highlighted something that has troubled the two liaisons for some time, and that, just to remind people, we are looking into possible reforms and alternative structures. Mr. Bedrosian and I have taken steps and are continuing to do that. And I understand Mr. Raymer's discomfort. And I think the way that the portfolio is being structured, I have problems with it. We have part of the portfolio which is indexed, which is very conservative, and then we have this very aggressive portfolio as well. It's an odd combination. But the way I read this is the retirement board is supposed to be independent. How we are structured to then pass judgments on individual components of an entire portfolio is just doesn't make sense. And I think in due course we are going to make a recommendation to change this structure because of exactly what Mr. Raymer pointed out. I too am rather uncomfortable with the percentages we're talking about in private investments. I'm not all that comfortable with the area. I've asked NEPC for their studies showing that it is a preferable way to go, and there are weightings, and I still have not received that.
I'm sorry. Where do you want
Mr. Pellegrino, then Ms. Tarkington.
Well, I'm going to have to call upon both Gene and the comptroller, and Mr. Bedrosian and Mr. Goldrick. But I was the liaison to the pension plan for 2 years. And the first observation I want to make is, I may be mistaken because I haven't looked closely at it lately, but what you're referring to as private equity, okay, is actually, in my mind, has always been the investment actually in equity. The investment in debt or other forms of debt is not equity. And so the first thing is I'm going to go to is I don't believe 20% of our retirement plan is in equity, privately placed equity. In fact, the vast majority of it, if I'm not mistaken, and this is where, Gene, you've reviewed the documents, are with secured lenders, loans, mezzanine funds, debt instruments. If I'm not mistaken, we actually have very little in equity. The only one that's in equity, I think, is the Welsh Carson Fund. But the AudX is a mezzanine fund. The TCW is the energy fund, is debt structure. And the third one, I can't recall right now, I believe is also debt-oriented. So I'm going to just point out for the board and for the public that this isn't a strategy that's 20% in the equity of privately held companies, which is what private equity refers to. Okay? This is a strategy that's actually invested in debt through privately placed funds, yes, because they don't publicly trade, yes. But that strategy is one of enhancing our returns by getting a return on the money we're lending back at a higher rate than we can do otherwise in the public markets. I think, for one, that that's a very sound and smart strategy in a world where the 10-year yield is about 1.6% and the hurdle rate for our plan is about 7.75%. So I take issue with how you've described it, the facts behind it, and the importance of this strategy for the retirement plan board to fulfill their fiduciary responsibilities accordingly.
I don't want to have misquoted Mr. Simon. Mr. Simon's actual expression was alternative investments.
Yes,
I
and
don't
that's
believe that-
correct.
I don't believe that he used the expression private equity, and I want to be careful that I didn't misquote Mr. Simon. What he said to me was 20% in alternative investments plus 5% in real estate.
Okay, so Ms. Tarkington, then Mr.
I just wanted to add that as it was described to the law committee, it was described as a change also in strategy in that they used to consider the investment commitment when determining that 20%. And today, they've changed that to be basically the actual called investment. And looking at sort of, because they found that their investments were only about 50% of their commitments because of the call dates and return of capital and so forth. The other point I'd like to just make on this one fund, and I may have missed this, this is these are three 14-year funds rather than 10 years. Just to make sure that everyone understands what, when they approve this, what they're approving.
Yeah, if I may, just try to clarify a few points in the interest of time. However, I'll keep them brief. Having sat through all of these retirement board meetings since I've been on the liaison, I do want to concur with Mr. Pellegrino that within that alternative asset category, the vast majority of the commitments today are indeed credit instruments rather than private equity. Another element, just to add to and maybe depart from some of the other comments related to the positives or negatives of the retirement board committing to private equity. And to be clear, this $10 million commitment, as Ms. Tarkington pointed out, is bifurcated into three buckets. $5 million, or 50%, is in private equity investing. $3 million, or 30%, is in venture, and $2 million, or 20%, is in credit. So of this specific investment, actually 80% is more in private equity and 20% is more in credit. If one looks to the presentation that HarborVest has put forth, and that's intentional, by the way, that's deliberate. If one looks to materials that HarborVest have provided, again, a firm that's been in business 30 years, page 15 of their presentation deck shows if you did an annual return going back from 90 to present, their returns across all their partnerships have been 13%, which is in contrast to the public equity index, which was at 7% during that same time period. The goal and intention of making what are relatively modest allocations of the overall portfolio to private equity is to make that deliberate trade-off of, yes, a 10 or 12 or 14-year illiquid investment in exchange for the goal of getting returns that are superior indeed to what the public markets would do. And that, in our view, and in my personal view, I'll speak for myself, as a liaison investment advisory committee member, HarborVest is an outstanding choice for the retirement board to do that, not only because of their track record I had mentioned, but also because as a fund of funds, they're investing in a broad, diverse group so that we as a retirement board and as a town potentially being there to make sure that we're making the right decision as the BET, are not making one bet, but we're rather making one bet in HarborVest, who in turn then uses their 30 years of wisdom to then intelligently allocate those in smaller bite sizes across 20-plus partnerships, thereby giving the scenario where we're caught in a bad illiquid investment a much lower likelihood. And the play in my mind, and I'm personally very comfortable with the magnitude of the allocation and the goal of that allocation is to allocate a modest and prudent but important part of the fund to something that has the goal of outperforming over a long period of time the public equity markets.
Mr. Norton?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had deferred on my comments, and I wanted to explain. I'm not going to address the merits of the issue, but I was the one who abstained in the Investment Advisory Committee, and I just wanted to explain why I was the abstention. As the managing director of a registered investment advisory firm, which is under the jurisdiction of the Securities and Exchange Investment Advisors, Securities and Exchange Commission and the Investment Advisors Act of 1940, and with a code of ethics as a public document on file, my concern was with the risk profile of the investment, and until I saw and had some comfort exposure to the risk profile, I was not going to take a position on this item. I have seen it, and I'm willing to support the item at this time.
Question? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye, nay.
Abstaining? 11-1-0.
Yep.
Mr. Bedrosian, I would entertain a motion at this time to add to the agenda the Oak Tree document.
Excuse me, do we need to do the HarborVest side letter?
What's that letter? No. I don't think you
Is
vote
it
on side letters.
Mr. Chairman, if it's implicit or explicit in that 11-1-0 vote that we're approving the investment as negotiated by the Town of Greenwich Legal Department, inclusive of side letters and all other amendments and negotiated
Absolutely.
pieces to those partnerships, that is my intention with the.
That would be mine as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so, Mr. Bedrosian, you would like to add the Oak Tree resolution to the agenda? Needs a second.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if I may add that the full BET review the increase in investment commitment by the
We need to add it to the agenda
retirement
first.
board. under a prior approved agreement of Oak Tree Opportunity Fund 9, this body had approved an $8 million commitment to the Oak Tree Fund. What I'd like to put forward as a resolution is a review and approval of an incremental $2 million to that same fund, same partnership, so that the total commitment will not exceed $10 million, inclusive of, on behalf of the Law Committee, inclusive of all fully negotiated agreements by the Town Law Committee, side letters and partnership agreements inclusive.
Okay, so I have a motion to add an item to the agenda.
Also move, or second that?
Seconded by Ms. Tarkington. Discussion on the motion to amend. Mr. Finger.
Just for clarification, Greg, so if we were to pass this resolution as presented, we would be saying to the retirement board that they would not be able to increase their investment, the retirement fund's investment in Oak Tree beyond the $10 million without coming back to us again.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
The motion, point of order, the motion is only the motion to entertain an item not on the agenda. Do I have that correctly?
Yeah. Correct.
And it requires a two-thirds vote.
So we have to, before we have discussion on it, we have to get it on the agenda first.
Correct.
Yes.
We have a motion that's second. Further discussion on the motion to add.
And the motion is to add it to the agenda. Yes, Mr. Chairman? Thank you.
Okay. On the motion to add, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
12-0.
Abstaining? That's 2/3, at least. Okay,
Okay.
discussion on the item. Mr. Bedrosian, I think you've already given your discussion, but
Mr. Chairman, so he's moved this item now, the resolution itself, and I've just seconded the item
and it's
itself.
on the agenda.
And it's also on the agenda. So we've had two motions now. The second, we're working on the second one.
No, that was a motion.
No, Leslie,
It was a
no.
motion to add an item to the agenda, and it is passed.
Can I answer? We have had a motion to add. You seconded.
Right.
We had discussion on the motion to
And we
add.
approved it.
We had a vote. We voted all in favor. The item is now on our agenda, so now we will have a discussion on the item itself, which is the additional $2 million, which I think Mr. Bedrosian has already given most of his explanation.
It requires a motion.
Right. So now,
Right.
we need a motion for the item, and
Right.
Mr. Bedrosian will give that. That needs to be seconded, and then we'll have discussion and a vote on that.
So, Mr. Chairman, you'd like me to actually deliver the motion, per se? The motion is the increase in the investment commitment by the Retirement Board under the prior approved agreement with Opportunity Fund 9 from $8 million to a number not to exceed $10 million is hereby regularized and approved, along with the side letter accompanying this investment between the Retirement Board and Oak Tree Opportunities Fund 9.
And I second that.
Moved, seconded, discussion.
The law committee.
Oh, committee reports.
Sorry.
Mr. Raymer.
Yeah, the law committee took this item up at our last meeting and found the resolution to be in legal order. I'll have some personal comment later, but that's the report of the law committee.
Okay. Discussion on the item. Mr. Raymer.
It should be noted, I think, that this regards $2 million, which was in fact already funded. So this is coming back to us after the fact. On a personal level, I was critical of the process that did or perhaps didn't take place in this particular instance. We met with Attorney McLaughlin. I had nothing but the highest personal regard for Mr. McLaughlin, both as an attorney and as a person. So if this sounds critical of an opinion that he reached, I hope you take it in the context. I hope it's taken in the context of the high regard that I have for this particular lawyer. Nevertheless, as we understood the facts as were relayed to us by Mr. Simon and by Mr. McLaughlin, an inquiry was made by the retirement board of the town attorney's office as to whether or not they could invest the additional $2 million without coming back to the BET for further authorization. At the time that we as a BET approved the $8 million investment in Oak Tree, we were entertaining, or at least the retirement board was entertaining, an addition of $4 million investment in Apollo. After further reflection, for reasons that are not necessarily clear to me, the decision was made at the retirement board that they were perhaps not as enthusiastic about Apollo, at least not at that time. And so they left themselves, in a sense, with funds on their hands that they wanted to put into this form of vehicle of investment. And if it wasn't going to be Apollo, then perhaps $2 million would be a good idea to invest in the Oak Tree investment, for which they'd already funded the $8 million. The opinion was given by Attorney McLaughlin that the resolution that we passed at that time was not specific as to dollar amount, but it did approve the documents that underlay the investment, and the documents that underlay the investment, if I understand correctly, and I certainly don't take offense if Attorney McLaughlin corrects my misstatements, which I apparently seem to be prone to do. The documents had allowed for the investor to invest additional funds on the mutual agreement of the fund and of the investor. And so the terms in the provisions were there in place on the agreements that we approved. And so the opinion was given by the town attorney's office that since the documents allow for additional investment, and since we approved the documents, then therefore it follows that the retirement board is already authorized to invest additional funds without coming back to the Board of Estimate and Taxation. In candor, my view is a bit different. The fund was put to us with a representation is too strong a word, but with a clear understanding on our part that we were being asked to approve $8 million of investment. It perhaps was not brilliant handling by the law committee or by the BET generally that we sponsored a resolution and in fact passed a resolution that was not specific as to dollar amount. But I think, and going forward, I certainly intend personally to be quite careful to be putting specific dollar amounts into resolutions as we go forward. But I think it would be fair for me also to comment to the town attorney's office and to his representative here that when something has come to us with an understanding that the investment that's intended is at a given dollar figure or some other material term in that form, if the material terms are going to change, I think it needs to come back to the BET for a reconsideration that did not occur in this case. And so I repeat for the second time, we are in fact ratifying, or to use the word that's given, regularizing, I'm not sure I can find that in Webster's, regularizing an investment that in fact has already been made. I will vote in favor of this item without hesitation, but I would be pleased if we never have a repetition of this.
Okay, just to add to Mr. Ramers, when I was building the agenda for this, again, I was led to believe that we already had this agreement in place for this item, and that's why you didn't see me put a line on there on that. But I think going forward, I think in our committees, I mean, we should be hearing about that ahead of time. This is the homework we should be doing a little bit in advance. I heard that, and at one point I said, well, I'll put it on. If it doesn't need to be, I will just pull it. And this was a rather unique month in the fact that the HR and the Budget Committee were Thursday. We had a Friday morning deadline to get out our agenda for tonight. So with that said, it really does help this clarification. We need to kind of make it a little bit cleaner looking. So with that, okay, all those in favor?
Can I make one more comment? Please?
You have okay.
I do, because this also has a side letter with it. And I wanted to make a comment on the side letter that this is our first side letter on Oak Tree. That, previously Mr. Pellegrino asked about how much time it takes and so forth. And this is an example of Mr. McLaughlin going overboard to get the side letter. And to this date, we still don't have a compendium of letters, of other side letters that other investors have in this particular fund. Nevertheless, the law committee decided to proceed because there are many other points here that are very important to have documented. So we have recommended that this side letter be used, even if it hasn't had the full review of compendium letters that we have, say, on our other Harbor Vest. So I just wanted to make that comment on this particular investment.
Okay. Further discussion? Question, here we go. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Opposed, 0, 0.
Beautiful.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sheen. Okay, I'm going to get back on our agenda real quick. Item 7, Human Resources. We have one report there. Mr. Johnson?
Mr. Chairman, just a few brief comments. As I understand it, one of the roles of the BET HR Committee is to review any additions to the number of positions in a town department, or any substantial reorganization or reclassification that increases the town's pension liability and contribution to deferred compensation savings plans. In fact, there's specific language in this year's budget resolutions to that, supporting that responsibility. At our regularly scheduled meeting last week, the HR Committee received a request from the Conservation Commission to upgrade a part-time position to a full-time, and the committee is currently reviewing that request. I would like to basically remind each town department that January would be a good time to bring a request for any additional position or substantial reorganization or reclassification to the HR Committee. We asked for this in January so that we may assist the Budget Committee in better understanding department budget submissions come February, March. So really kind of a reminder that we would like to review any position changes.
Thank you. And I would add to that, that does help the Budget Committee have an understanding of the position changes. And also the other item that I think is important is before we get to the MC annual reviews and everything, you know, we reached out and said, look, if the system needs a tweak or whatever it needs, we need to do that. And I just want to make sure we're aware. We're there. I think the committee is looking at that, and I think I want to be ready for that just as well, instead of a repeat of kind of last year.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And as discussed last month at our BT meeting, we have hired a consultant to help us further review that MC compensation process. I would also suggest that we do have some elections coming up next fall, that the HR Committee will be reviewing elected officials' salaries. And we hope to address that earlier in the budget process so it can be incorporated.
Okay. Thank you. 8, we already took care of. Number 9, we have, Mr. Norton, you had in the Nathaniel Willow Building Committee?
Yes, and Mr. Chairman, I'd like to reference that because the statement I made in that, I think, has been changed. It was at our meeting last week, it was decided that we would hold a groundbreaking ceremony on the 8th. But the chairman of the Nathaniel Witherell Board, who wants to invite the governor, has asked that that be established, the date for that be established once they can confirm with the governor's office for that event. So the date that's indicated in my report of the 8th of January is not a good date at this time.
All right, thank you very, very much. Mr. Brady, you've had a busy month.
Just getting started. The IT strategic plan report is included herein. The one thing to note on it is that the two big projects, one that was discussed earlier, the assessor project, tax collector project, the second being the HRIS projects, are not included on the Barry Dunn schedule here because they're already deemed in train. They're underway. The rest of the work, primarily what Barry Dunn has ascertained in its work with various town departments, is that the major effort, initially at least, is on issues related to the organization and structure of our IT area, rather than the acquisition of new software and similar assets. It's very much focused on how we go about doing things related to IT. There will undoubtedly be more on this subject as the next 6 weeks to 2 months go by.
Well, thank you again. I know that's turning into quite a big assignment. Okay, back to item 10, approval of the comprehensive our CAFR and our audits with our acceptance letter. Mr. Norton.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to move that we accept the 3 audits that are included, which is the annual audit for the town of Greenwich, or referenced as the comprehensive annual financial report, the single audit for the state, and the single audit for the federal. And on behalf of the audit committee, which was approved 4-0 at our meeting last Thursday, I so move. I will get to the other item subsequent to that, which is the management letter.
Okay, so with
And
that, that's moved on behalf of a committee.
And these are in draft form until they're approved by the full BET. And if we approve these 3 documents tonight, the draft will be deleted from the language on each one of the pages.
Okay, discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Mr. Norton?
Thank you.
Mike?
No second
That-
on the committee.
I-
No,
that came from
That's a committee.
Oh, okay, sorry.
As, in effect, as the next item comes from the committee, the audit committee, which is to accept the 4 items on the management letter. The committee, the audit committee considered those last Thursday at its meeting. 2 of the items are standing items. The other 2 items have already been addressed. One was a result of an audit that was completed by the internal auditor for the student activity fund, and the 2 items that are standing involve review of capital assets and the taxes. I can't find it here. What's the 4th item?
The first item's a pension item. There's the one that Lauren was referring to before was the lack of reconciliation in the sewer assessment area, which will go away when we get the new modules, if we do get the new modules for the Munis system, and the tax collector and tax assessor can rectify the Munis shortcoming.
That item and the item on the capital assets is a standing item which has appeared in the last few management letters, actually by the prior firm, but the other 2 items have been addressed at this point, at this time. So on behalf of the committee, we vote to accept for the full board to accept the management letter.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I can't find it.
Abstaining? Okay. Old business, meeting schedules. I put this on there because I think we're about to really start what I call our busy meeting cycle from January right through May. Last week, the Budget Committee, as you know, moved from Tuesday night, and they couldn't do Wednesday, so they went to Thursday, and I think the HR Committee followed. But yet, even in our very complex system of notifying and email and posting, people were here for the Budget Committee meeting on Tuesday night. On Tuesday night. They actually came on Tuesday night, they didn't get the notice. I can say this, we have, besides the budget proceedings, our regular committees, I know there's already talk of the audit committee moving in February. We're in this room tonight, as an example. We need to be very careful. We all need to check our schedules. Elaine obviously updates what she calls the everything schedule, the one with all the colors. We really need to be very cautious, because when we do move a meeting, it really, I'll give you an example right now. The March 21st meeting of the full BET, that's what we call our decision night. That's our typical Thursday night meeting. I still have a request from the Board of Ed because they have a regular meeting that night. But between our regular meetings, our public hearing, our decision night, there's just not a lot of room to go. But we need to do these in advance and make sure they're posted. So I encourage everybody, if you keep an eye on your calendar, check your calendars, be up front, be in advance, because it really does. It was sort of disheartening to see that people coming after the workday on a Tuesday to a meeting meeting has been moved. So I thought it was important to highlight that. Item number 15, BET minutes for November 19th, 2012. Moved by Ms. Kiernan, seconded by Mr. Pellegrino. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Chairman's report. Ms. Kiernan, anything?
I attended a PTAC meeting as well as a number of HR meetings regarding implementation of the HR study.
Thank you. Mr. Norton?
I have nothing to report, except that we're going to have a contract signing for Nathaniel Withall tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock at the facility.
Good to hear, good to hear. And I'll forego a chairman's report this month. Obviously, I didn't make any meetings, I didn't go to PTAC, I didn't do anything this month, which is probably not true, but I wish everybody a very, very, very Merry Christmas. And my presents, even though we're all friends, I want them wrapped. You can get them to me at any time. And don't forget the holiday cookies. I have nothing against a few extra pounds at the holiday, so you can just call me and I'll come get them, so.
Mr. Chairman, last year the chairman gave us gifts.
Thanks, Mr. Norton.
Careful, you might add to the schedule.
Maria, Peter, Roland, I mean, have a great holiday, and I'm sure everybody's gonna, there's a few more days before the
And
holiday,
Maria.
so there's room for a couple hundred more emails about something. But with that, Mr. Brady,
I move we adjourn. End of the year.
Mr. Goldberg,
Second.
Second.
yes, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you.